Welcome back. All right, so I want to talk about Jeremy Swayman. So I put on my Jeremy Swayman jersey here. Swayman and the Bruins nowhere near a deal, and the question's been out there of what he could get and what he might be worth. Jeremy Swayman had a very good season this past year, playing for a Boston Bruins team that I thought achieved more than expected in terms of regular season success. In the postseason, they get to the second round. They're unable to get past said second round, and it's a storyline that we've seen with Boston for the last little while here. Now, Swayman is looking at asking for, say, 10 million. Let's just say 10 million is the asking point. The Boston Bruins do not have that cap space. $8,636,667. And I've seen people asking, well, why doesn't a team just put in an offer sheet for like 9 million or 10 million a year and they can get Swayman? And honestly, odds are they might be able to poach Swayman at that price point, but I don't know that you can defend a price point like that for a goaltender. Now, Bobrovsky gets mentioned a lot, but I want to go through this. So, looking at players or at goaltenders, strictly goaltenders here, and I went through each division, I went through each team, and I went through different goaltenders with different kinds of contracts. So, starting with Anaheim and John Gibson, it's a $6.4 million cap hit until 26-27. When you look at John Gibson's cap hit and you compare it to some of the other names on the board, you can understand why it's difficult for Anaheim to move Gibson in the event that they're still actively trying to move him. There's always going to be the rumors out there because last summer he clearly would have welcomed a trade. We'll put it that way. Would have welcomed a move. But at almost $6.5 million for a cap hit, it would throw off some team salary structures. Stuart Skinner in Edmonton is an absolute bargain at $2.6 million for a cap hit, and that's till 25-26. So there's a goaltender who went all the way to the Stanley Cup final. I know there'll be a debate about, well, he's not that good to win a Stanley Cup. We'll get over to the Stanley Cup goaltenders, but I think Skinner being one win away from a Stanley Cup, I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And I think the Oilers, again, have quite the bargain in net between him and Pickard. Darcy Kemper with the Kings now, $5.2 million cap hit until 2026-2027. Kemper, of course, won a Stanley Cup recently, so I mean, at $5.2 million for the cap hit, it's high for who he is right now, but he won a Stanley Cup. That always drives up the price. Philip Grubauer with Seattle, $5.9 million cap hit until 26-27. The time that contract was signed, it looked all right. He was coming off a pretty strong season with Colorado, but that's a almost $6 million cap hit for a goaltender who was quite good for a contending team. And I would think that would be a fair contract for Swayman. That would also be a huge deal for the Boston Bruins potentially. Thatcher Demko has a $5 million cap hit for Vancouver for 2 more seasons through 25-26. Every day, the whole Demko injury thing seems to morph. At this point, I'm pretty convinced that he's never going to play hockey again. So there we go. I don't think that's going to be the case, but the doom and gloom in Vancouver sphere is it's there. In Vegas, Aiden Hill took a Stanley Cup win and parlayed that into a cap hit of $4.9 million. That contract ends this season, so he's in a contract year. Something to keep an eye on if you're playing fantasy. Goalies in contract years can be pretty good as well. Peter Mrazek has a $4.25 million cap hit with Chicago for 2 more seasons. Georgiev in Colorado, he's in a contract year. He has a $3.4 million cap hit. I would think Georgiev's going to look for an increase next summer, and Swayman's contract could, if it's a big one, right? It could drive up the asking prices for some of these goalies when their contracts are up. Ottinger's contract's up at the end of this coming season. He has a $4 million cap hit. He's a restricted free agent next summer. So I'm going through this with Swayman this year. I could be going through it with Ottinger next year. Ottinger, at that point, though, will be 1 year removed from UFA status. So Dallas should be sitting down with Ottinger now and trying to get this done, because you don't want this situation next summer for Ottinger, right, Dallas? Minnesota Gustafson, $3.75 million cap hit till 25-26 at the time he signs that contract, coming off of a very strong year. And now that contract doesn't look as great, and there's been talk about whether or not they're trying to trade him, and that $3.75 million cap hit, we'll see if anybody takes that on. Winnipeg. So we get to Connor Hellebuck, and this is an important contract to look at. So it's an $8.5 million contract in terms of cap hit until 2030, 2031. It is that long-term contract that I think both Boston and Swayman would be looking at. And now the argument you have to make if you're Jeremy Swayman is that $8.5 million cap hit that Hellebuck signed for with Winnipeg is team friendly, that it's a bargain, because I don't think you can argue that Jeremy Swayman's a better goaltender than Connor Hellebuck. That's a difficult argument to make. And since Hellebuck just signed that contract last year, it absolutely should be used as a comparable, and it makes it difficult to argue that Swayman should get a $10 million plus cap hit when you're looking at just the comparisons to other goaltenders. Merzlikins, $5.4 million cap hit until 2026-2027. That contract's not aged well. We know that they've had difficulties trying to trade him to the point where it sounds like they've given up on trying to trade him. And he's probably going to be a Columbus Blue Jacket at least through this season, unless he has a really strong start to the season and they're able to move him then. Jacob Markstrom has a $6 million cap hit until 2025-2026. He, of course, is now with New Jersey. New Jersey does not have a cap hit of $6 million. Calgary did retain. But for this video, I had to have the full cap hit for the player because that's not something Swayman's going to argue. Well, I should make what Markstrom makes in New Jersey. Now, we'll leave out the cap part from Calgary. Sorokin has an $8.25 million contract in terms of cap hit right through till 2027-2028. Can we argue Swayman ahead of Sorokin this past season? Yes. But overall, if you're looking at the body of work of the two goaltenders, I think Sorokin's got the stronger argument to make that $8.25 million. And it makes it difficult to give Swayman anything above that $8.25 million for Sorokin, that contract being signed not that long ago. The salary cap going up is going to be an argument as well. But it's difficult to argue that a guy should make that much more because the salary cap goes up when the contracts have been signed that recently. Igor Shesterkin's one that, of course, Ranger fans are really crossing their fingers that will get signed soon enough. $5.67 million cap hit for this season. And then he's a potential UFA next summer. And word has it he wants $10 million plus. So Shesterkin may be in this situation soon. The difference being Swayman's a restricted free agent. Shesterkin would then be an unrestricted free agent. So a little more panic, I would think, for the Rangers if they don't get Shesterkin signed like now. Like now. Tristan Jarry with Pittsburgh, $5.37 million cap hit until 2027-2028. Jarry's a middle-of-the-road goaltender, and so that contract obviously less than whatever you're going to give Swayman in all likelihood. UPL and Buffalo, $4.75 million cap hit until 2028-2029. Based on the season Luukkonen just had, that contract looks perfectly fine. But goaltenders are very unpredictable. And this is something, too, that if you're negotiating with a goaltender and you're looking at putting in a big investment, you want somebody who's very predictable. Bobrovsky's been relatively predictable. $10 million cap hit for him until 2026, so for 2 more seasons. But at times, that Bobrovsky contract has been talked about. At times, there's been discussion about whether or not Florida would move that contract to allow themselves greater cap flexibility somewhere else on the roster. And while it hasn't happened, it is worth noting because Bobrovsky, who has won multiple Vezina trophies, now he's got a Stanley Cup ring. But that contract, I totally understand why people look at that and go, but $10 million for a goalie seems like a lot. Linus Ullmark's in the final year of a contract paying him $5 million with the Ottawa Senators this year, of course, being from Boston. And this is part of what put Boston behind the 8-ball, so to speak. Trading Ullmark means they have to sign Swayman or go into the season with Korpisalo as the starter, which, while I think Korpisalo can have a bounce back, it's not an optimal situation to have him as the starting goaltender for your Boston. Vasilevsky, cap hit $9.5 million till 2027-2028. You could make the argument, if you're the agent for Jeremy Swayman, that Vasilevsky signed a team-friendly deal. You can also make the argument the salary cap's gone up since Vasilevsky signed his contract, but I don't know that you can make the argument that Swayman's a better goaltender than Andrei Vasilevsky. Even as a Boston Bruins fan, I got to be realistic. Vasilevsky, multiple Stanley Cup rings, dominant goaltender at points over the last 5 years. I can't make the argument that Swayman deserves more money than Vasilevsky, even though the contract was signed a while back, and the cap has gone up a bit. And then there's Wall with Toronto. And this contract stands out to me for a simple reason. So it's a $3.67 million cap hit until 2027-2028. It is the exception, it seems, when it comes to goaltenders. We talk a lot about how players get paid for potential. So forwards and defensemen, regularly we see them get paid big money before they've put up the big numbers because teams know they're going to do it. We don't see that with goaltenders. We really don't. When I was going through and putting this list together, I was like, you know what? Goaltenders don't get paid by potential like forwards and defensemen do. They get paid for what they've done. They get paid for what they've already accomplished. So while we can look at Swayman and go, hey, he's probably going to be an excellent starting goaltender for maybe the next decade plus, goaltenders really have been paid for what they've done. Sorokin's a good example. He gets paid after having some really good years. Hellebuck has had fantastic years for many years on end with Winnipeg, and he gets the $8.5 million. Vasilevsky. Now we've got Ottinger coming up in Dallas next summer. Goalies get paid for what they've done a little bit more than we see with forwards and defensemen at this point. It's just something I wanted to mention. So Swayman was fourth in goals saved above expected around the whole National Hockey League this year, according to Money Puck, behind Connor Hellebuck, Thatcher Demko, and Anthony Stolarz. And thumbs up to the Toronto Maple Leafs for picking up Stolarz, because if Woll has any kind of struggles this year, Stolarz showed in Florida he can be excellent. So the 3.07 wins above replacement, so above a replacement level goaltender, that's what Swayman gave Boston. And that's behind only Hellebuck, Demko, and Stolarz as well. So again, there's Stolarz, top three in the National Hockey League, and that's amongst goaltenders with enough games played to qualify for that. Now, one note with the play of Jeremy Swayman is his save percentage on high danger chances, not fantastic. .752 save percentage on high danger unblocked shot attempts, which was 34th amongst goaltenders who played a minimum of 25 games. So if you get into the weeds of it, you might be able to find some numbers to say, Swayman's good, he's very good, but is he worthy of being paid more than a bunch of other goaltenders? Swayman hasn't had like a true season as a starting goaltender in the NHL where he plays 55 plus games, where he's a clear number one. Like, he's had the benefit of having Ullmark as his battery mate there in Boston, and so you'd know, well, if I don't have a great start to this one, Ullmark's on the bench. I need a night off. I'll get that with Ullmark. We may not have that this season with Boston, with Korpisalo, like we did with Ullmark. So we'll see how that all turns out. Now, looking at cup-winning goaltenders. Actually, first off, I also wanted to point out the .916 save percentage that he put up was only behind Stolarz, Hellebuck, Varlamov, and Demko. So again, Toronto got themselves a deal with Stolarz. It's not even on the board because the contract's dirt cheap, because Stolarz hasn't been a starter at the NHL level to this point, so I totally get it. But honestly, his numbers were fantastic. Now, looking at Stanley Cup winning goaltenders over the last decade. 2015, it's Corey Crawford with Chicago. Very good goaltender, yes. The unquestioned best in the NHL? No. But a very good goaltender when Chicago needed him. 2016 and 2017, in the games that Pittsburgh clinched the Stanley Cup, both in 2016 and 2017, Matt Murray was the goaltender of record. And Murray's an interesting one because right now he's on his contract right now actually is much better than the one last year. But the one that just expired wasn't great. And part of the reason that he gets big money is because of back-to-back Stanley Cup wins, and as a rookie both times, because he didn't play enough games during 2015, 2016 to not qualify as a rookie in 2016, 2017. And yet, if I asked you right now, if I said, hey, do you think Matt Murray is a Stanley Cup caliber goaltender right now, I think the answer would probably be no. 2018, Washington wins with Braden Holtby, excellent goaltender. Not really, he didn't really sustain it after that. I remember at one point looking at Holtby's win totals and how good Washington was and thinking, at some point maybe he's going to threaten Marty Berdeur's win record if he keeps winning like this, but it doesn't usually last that way. And again, goaltenders really unpredictable. A good example of this is 2019, Jordan Binnington wins the Stanley Cup. First year, and he wins the Stanley Cup. Has not been back there since, but he was on a hot streak. He was one of the best goaltenders in the league over the second half of that season and rode that into the playoffs. 2020 and 2021, Andrei Vasilevsky, your goalie of record for the Stanley Cup win. 2022, it's Darcy Kemper with Colorado, and he parlays that into a nice, solid contract at $5.2 million of a cap hit, which now has been traded to the LA Kings. Aiden Hill in 2023, I already mentioned, used that Stanley Cup win to get himself a raise, and this season, Bobrovsky gets $10 million. Bobrovsky gets the cup, and he's a $10 million cap hit goaltender, which gets Florida off the hook a little bit for paying a goaltender maybe a little bit more than they should have. We look around the NHL, and most teams, it's around 10% that they spend on their goaltender of their salary cap. But a lot of teams are beneath that. And it is interesting because it's a question that we've had in the NHL for a long time. How much is a goaltender worth? So let's just say that another team offers sheets Swayman. Just say that happens. Somebody offers sheets Swayman and Boston cannot match. How much would that hurt Boston going forward? Would they be able to just go out and find another goaltender like San Jose picks up Askarov? And while the price for Askarov wasn't nothing, it was definitely something a team could pay. And I think there's enough good young goaltenders around the NHL that in the event that Boston lost Swayman and he got poached, I think Boston would be able to find a replacement. Not Swayman level necessarily, but as I've said here, sometimes the Stanley Cup winning goaltender isn't necessarily a guy who's highly thought of before the playoffs. Sometimes it's just a guy who gets hot at the right time. So how much money should Swayman be worth to the Bruins? It's obviously a very important contract for Boston, but how much should it be worth? So, with all these numbers on the board of goaltenders that I think we can make arguments for that are really good or maybe a little bit underrated, and goaltenders who make some good money, which contract would you be comparing him to if you're his agent? And which contract would you be comparing him to if you're the Bruins? So this is where things get interesting. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if he signs over the next 48 hours, awesome. And we'll see what the cap hit ends up coming in at. Honestly, I think if it's $8 million, I'd be happy. An $8 million cap hit for Swayman would be still below what the Bruins have in terms of cap space, and it would make sense, and it would leave him below Vasilevsky, below Bobrovsky, and Hellebuck, as well as Sorokin, which I think is fine. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. I will talk to you again soon.